Welcome to Leap. I'm Tricia Fisher, and I'm going to be hosting this session of Leap by interviewing Dan Fisher on a topic near and dear to his heart, the ideal team player. This is a book by Patrick Lencioni. We're going to discuss how we can be and how we can help our team members to be more humble, hungry, and smart. I know I'll probably mess that up at least once during the session, but as always, please ask any questions or address any comments in the chat, and we will get to them as soon as we see them. We love for these sessions to be interactive, so please ask away and comment away. So let's get started. Dan, are you ready?
Yeah.
Can you tell us why you chose this specific topic to talk about today?
Well, if you've ever heard me talk before, I usually talk about company culture. I strongly believe that having a strong company culture is what makes the difference between kind of mediocre performance and over and above performance. I think the great teams that I know about, and Mike's on this call, his company has a super strong company culture, and they perform way better than average, obviously. To have a great company culture, I think it requires to have great teams and great teamwork. And that's hard to have. It's hard to have a great team if you have even one jackass on the team. Now, jackass is a highly technical term that this book, The Ideal Team Player, uses often. But I think those of us on the call probably have some idea what I'm talking about there. So in order to have a great team, the first component is to start with a team full of people who at least want to be great teammates.
So, in your opinion, you're looking for somebody who has the characteristics of all three: humble, hungry, and smart.
Yeah, and we're going to talk in depth about each of these traits, but I want today to be as much about us kind of looking inwardly and saying, am I humble, hungry, and smart? And if not, if because most of us aren't perfectly humble, perfectly hungry, and perfectly smart in terms of people smart. And if the answer is no, then how can we help improve ourselves first to set the tone? And then obviously, how can we help our team members be better as well?
Okay. Let's dive into the first characteristic of the ideal team player: humble. And humble is about lacking ego or arrogance. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, I mean, someone who's willing to point out the contributions of others, someone who's not always saying, look at me, and taking all the credit. So they're willing to share credit. They're emphasizing the team component of things and really looking at that collective success and talking about what we did, not always what I did.
And this seems like an easy trait to look the other way on. If someone is really good at, for instance, sales, do we really need them to be humble? Do we really care?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's really important and natural to feel proud. So there's a difference between pride and a lack of a difference between pride and a lack of humility. So a great salesperson definitely should be proud, but if they're not humble, it can damage the team that really got these results in the first place, right? So are they giving credit to the other team members? So let's just say I'm in a 50 store company and I'm number one on the sales leaderboard of the company. Obviously I should be proud, right? But am I thanking the others that helped me get there, or am I just saying, hey, look at me, look at me? So in our business, right, we have delivery drivers. They're a huge important part of our sales success. We have whoever's refurbishing the used product. We have whoever's buying the right product. If I'm not buying the right product, I don't care who I am, I'm not going to be selling very much. Who's unpacking and merchandising the product to make sure it looks great in the store? Who's pricing it right? Who's marketing it? Some of that is me, right? I'm as the salesperson, as the lead salesperson, there's probably some components of that I'm doing, but I'm not doing all of it. And so when I'm talking about look at me, am I saying look at my team, we're number one in the company? Or am I saying look at me, in which case I'm probably alienating all those others who are helping me get to that number one position? And if you've ever worked on a team like that, that those teammates aren't going to keep busting their butt for me if I'm not sharing the credit.
Yeah, so there's no I in team, right, Dan?
Correct.
Would you say that one could mistake being humble for being passive?
Yeah, I think that's a misconception. I think there might be that conception that if I'm humble, that I'm not a strong leader. I'm a passive leader. But I think that there's plenty of super strong leaders who are also humble. I think when we talk about humble in this context, we're talking about someone who listens to the ideas of others, takes them into account. I mean, a lot of times the leader may have a very strong idea. It may even be the best idea, but rather than running with what might be the best idea, why not make it better by listening to my team improve on it? Maybe you add one, two, three, four great suggestions to an already great idea, and then you get a rock star idea. And that only comes through humility. If I'm the type of leader that I only take my own ideas, I'm really missing out on those added values. There's a quote by C.S. Eliot that I love. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And so, like that passive person, sometimes I think we think of humility and we say they're passive. Sometimes that's actually not a humble person. It's someone who's just thinking less of themselves. So uh, being selfless is more important. I'm sorry, I bumbled
Hmm.
that a little bit,
No,
but
yeah, that's definitely a great quote. I love that quote. So let's talk about the leaders of a team for a minute. Most leaders earn the role because of their drive for success, but that does not always equal humility.
yeah, I mean, most leaders work really hard to get to that manager level, or if we're the company owner, to grow our business to a certain level. And success, often comes by busting your butt, right? You're working harder, you're working longer. And so sometimes success comes that way. So it's important to understand. I don't want to get too much into psychology here, but some of us have a chip on our shoulder, right? So there's a lot of reasons that could happen. Maybe your parents were hard on us or didn't recognize our accomplishments. Maybe in school we weren't kind of a standout among our peers, and so we felt ourselves trying to keep up all the time. Maybe we have friends who are overachievers, and we kind of weren't there when we were younger. And as adults, that kind of leaves us with chips on our shoulder and something to prove, and really leads to that drive. Just a little bit about myself. I know Mike's going to laugh when I say this, but I talk about this all the time, how I'm an introvert, right? So um, that comes from insecurities, right? In my case, I had an awesome dad who taught me a lot about work ethic and everything, but I don't think he said he was proud of me until he was like 73. So it was just one of those things that I was always hungry for those compliments, always looking for that recognition. And in my case, the introvert part came because I was just worried about saying the wrong thing and the backlash from that. But one of the things that happens from this chip on your shoulder is we compensate by working extra hard. We compensate by whenever we do have accomplishments, we kind of raise our hand and say, "Hey, look at me! Look at what I did." And that's really the definition of that lack of humility that we're trying to fight against. So I think almost all of us have some level of insecurity. The problem comes when we start projecting onto others. Like, just because I worked 80-hour weeks, you should have to work 80-hour weeks. Or just because, I'm successful, look at me, look at me. That's where, you create that negative energy, and you really need to look for help with that.
Yeah, I know a lot of us know you always call yourself an introvert, but most people who know you really don't think of you that way. You definitely put yourself out there, and I don't think anyone would think of you as like an egomaniac or anything either.
Well, you're my wife. You know me best. You probably know different than that. But I've worked really hard at overcoming that kind of the chip on my shoulder and those perceptions. But that's really what it takes. Is it takes a lot of work and a lot of help from other people.
Hmm. So back to the book. When you were reading the book, was that the light bulb moment for you, where you wanted to like shift gears a little bit and focus on humble, hungry, smart?
Yeah, I mean, really, a bunch of things happened at once, but several important things were me kind of discovering some really great books. One of them was this book. One of them is The Advantage that I talk about a lot by Patrick Lencioni also. And, it kind of made me realize that I was kind of going about this all wrong. I think I was a good manager, but I definitely wasn't a good leader. And these books really helped me recognize that.
Hmm. So was there a moment that you can remember you were just directly slapped in the face with a huge dose of humility?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it came kind of. we had 4 stores for forever, and then we grew from 4 to 8 stores, and then from 8 to 13 stores in the period of about a year and a half. So we went from 4 to 13, and what I realized was, again, kind of looking back, I was a pretty good manager. We had 4 pretty high volume stores, but once we grew to 13, I had no idea what to do. And I realized that I was really the problem holding us back from progress. And I was very fortunate to have hired Mike Simoncini and Joe Luzak, who continue to be a big part of the Majik team. And they helped me realize that I can expect more from people, and that we need to really challenge people to succeed, and expect these values. And also that, combined with these books I was reading, really made a great combination of teaching me that I needed to be better as a leader rather than just a kind of a manager.
Hmm. Yeah, so if one does this introspective look that you have done in the past, and they feel they need to work on humility, what would you recommend first? What would be the first thought that you would think of to, kind of take a deep dive into this?
I think first and foremost, it's got to be something you really want. Like, you can't um, pretend that you want to be humble and then have your team see the real you come through. So if you truly want to be humble, then you really have to force yourself to take some unnatural feeling actions and processes, and kind of like fake it until you mean it. But you really have to want it, right? And by fake it, what I mean is you have to set reminders on your phone, set a sticky pad on your computer that says, remember to recognize others, remember to be humble, and what happens is, over time, and the other thing you should do is really talk to your team and be very raw with them, and explain to them, look, I realize I'm not the most humble person in the world. I need your help, and I need you to remind me when I'm acting like an egomaniac, or when I say something inappropriate that doesn't recognize the people that really deserve the credit. Or if I'm not taking any credit, because that's another form of lack of humility, is if I'm like saying, no, I didn't do anything, you guys did it all, even though I was part of the team. So having that honest conversation with the team, asking them to remind you and call out when you're struggling or when you do well, and then making a point of recognizing them for their accomplishments, instead of maybe what you might have done in the past, which is kind of take the credit for the wins. And what happens, I've found, is that's like a win-win-win, where um, when I started really showing recognition to the people who deserved it, you could see a change in their faces, you could see a change in their demeanor, and that made me happy, right? So they're happier, I'm happier. And then it's human nature. When people are happier, they work better, they do more, and you get better results. So it's kind of a win-win-win. Everyone's happier and the results are better.
So basically, you have to want it, and then you have to model it, and then it'll kind of transform from there.
Yeah, I think wanting it first, forcing yourself to model it, and that's what I mean by like faking it, is you're kind of forcing yourself to do it. But then over time, there's such a positive reinforcement from that it becomes second nature almost. And so now I think that's kind of a normal thing for me. I don't really have to force it anymore.
Yeah, those are really good points. So we're going to move on to the second characteristic of the ideal team player, and that is hungry. But before we do, again, we want to remind everyone to add any questions in the chat, and we'll address them as we see them. And please feel free to do that. Um, Dan, my understanding of hungry is that if someone is truly hungry, they go above and beyond the work requirements. They're always looking for more to do, more to learn, more responsibilities. Does that summarize it in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good summary. Essentially, there's no need for the manager to push them. They just always want more.
Hmm. So, given that, is it possible to be too hungry or be hungry in an unhealthy way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely an unhealthy hunger. The way I look at the healthy version of hunger is, when I'm at work, I'm going to give 200%. So I'm making sure I'm doing everything I can to get what I need to get done, completed. I'm going to do everything to the best of my ability. If I need to come early, I'm going to come early. If I need to stay late, I'm going to stay late. But I think the unhealthy hunger is kind of that chip on the shoulder that I was talking about earlier. There was many years that I worked 80, 90 hours a week in, week out, week in, week out, because I thought that's what was necessary. And I think that leads to burnout. And I think that that's kind of an unhealthy hunger. I think if you need to one week, great. There's going to be weeks you have to work long hours, but it shouldn't be every week all the time. I would much rather have myself and have my team get 80 hours of work that a traditional employee would do done in 40 or 50 hours rather than, putting in those 80 to 100-hour weeks.
Hmm. So sometimes it seems as though there's people that are proud of not being hungry at work, not wanting to be a so-called workaholic, for example. One can equate hungry as not having a work-life balance or balance in your life. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean that can be hard to overcome, but if that's something that like someone on this call feels, or if someone on your team feels that way, I mean, I think there's two things you can do to really take control of that, and one is you kind of owning the narrative a little bit, taking control of the story, and making sure they understand that hungry doesn't necessarily mean no personal time and super long hours. Hungry just means busting my ass when I'm doing what I'm doing, whatever that is. Um, and then secondly, I think it's important to find a something that's meaningful to them. So it's a lot easier for me to bust my butt if I'm working on something that means something to me. So in rent to own, that's easy, right? We all have stories of customers we've helped in many, many different ways. And sometimes we've had to stay after. Sometimes we've had to come in early. Sometimes we had to work on weekends that when we were supposed to be off. But it's easy to do that when you're helping the people we work with in rent to own. And the other part of that, and my personal favorite thing to do is just seeing those. I like developing our people, right? So like doing these types of trainings where you see those light bulbs go off, where someone connects what you're teaching to their leadership journey, and then you see them grow into leaders, whether they started out as delivery drivers or salespeople, whatever, and they slowly learn kind of what leadership means, and now they're running a huge volume store, that type of thing.
Hmm. So, how do you get that message across when you're trying to relay a healthy hunger versus an unhealthy hunger? How do you practically go about that with your team?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think just constantly having that conversation about, I should say, messaging across the company about what our core values are, what they mean, what we're about as a company. The people we help, the leaders we're developing, making sure that's a constant message. But then also having one-on-one conversations with our coworkers, making sure we know what's important to them, and then connecting what we do day to day with with what's important to them.
Hmm. And this next question is a question that may pop up in the chat, but we're gonna address it. What happens if you have that person on your team who you just can't seem to motivate? They're not buying into your mission. They're not buying into what the message is you want to get across. What do you do with them?
Well, in my opinion, if someone doesn't fit our values, then we need to move on from them at some point, right? So if we've done a good job, and this is the important part, if we've done a good job of messaging what our values mean, and we've had one-on-one discussions with this person, and we've shared with them, humble, hungry, smart, and hungry is your challenge, and we just need you to put forth more effort, and we've tried to connect them with our mission somehow. If there's just not a connection there, they're going to be happier working somewhere else. And I think that's the direction we need to move. If you've been really clear about your messaging, they're probably looking for another job anyway because they see that they're not a
Mhm.
fit for the culture.
Yeah, yeah, that's good advice. So finally, we come to the third characteristic of the ideal team player, and that's smart. And by smart, we mean people smart. Can you explain what you mean by, or what Patrick Lencioni means by people smart?
Yeah, I mean, when he's talking about people smart, he doesn't mean intelligence. So whenever you hear us talking about smart throughout the rest of this talk, we don't mean intelligence. We're talking more about emotional intelligence. It's kind of similar to that. I'm sure most of you have heard that term. It's about reading the room, asking good questions, listening closely, staying engaged in conversations. Just again, just making sure we're connecting with the people in the room.
Hmm. So do you think someone can get better at reading the room if it doesn't come naturally to you?
Well, I think this is a lot like Humble, where, and again, it's another one of my challenges. So, it's a lot like Humble, where you need to ask for help. You need for people to help you recognize when you're not connecting. I tend to be a very task focused, results oriented person. So when I would be in meetings, I would a lot of times plow through the agenda, plow through what I wanted to accomplish, and sometimes there were unspoken things or there was a vibe in the room that I wasn't picking up on. And fortunately, again, I had a pretty good relationship with my team, and they shared that with me over a few meetings. And we did something kind of a humorous thing where we came up with a safe word called pineapple, and someone would yell out when you like my safe word. Someone, is it
Oh,
your safe word too? Someone would yell out pineapple, and then that would be my cue to slow down, to to reevaluate what we're talking about and make sure that I was on the same page as everyone, ask questions, that type of thing. So, uh,
yeah, it was a much nicer way of saying, other than saying, hey, slam man, stop shutting down everybody's opinions, right?
yeah, yeah, that was the earlier version. I was called the Slam Man. So, yeah,
So, you had asked me to share some examples of helping Bob from the book. So I will read them, and these are just some examples that that you may come across when you're in this type of environment. But anyway, here we
yeah.
go.
These are just some other examples that kind of fictional examples that were in the book that I thought really highlighted how this works, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay. Bob, this is the part of the meeting where you thank her for all the hard work that she did on that project. Bob, I'm telling you this because I know you want to know, not because I'm mad, but I'm really bummed about my family situation, and it would be really nice if you acknowledged it. There's one more. Bob, the next time you have an issue with my team, please don't send an email. Or if you feel that you must, please work with somebody to phrase it appropriately. My team was pretty miffed last night when they received your email.
Yeah, I think you can probably get the gist of if this wasn't about Bob, but it was about you, it can kind of feel some kind of way, to use one of my favorite phrases. So as the leader, you have to make sure that if someone's bringing this to you, you have to remember you ask them to bring it to you. You've got to be sure not to sound defensive when you respond, and in fact, thank them for doing that because this is great feedback for you to learn from this. And it's really hard, but over time, as you build good relationships, it gets easier and easier.
Yeah, so it's definitely great for self improvement, but it's definitely a challenge for a lot of people. How can you help someone on the team that's struggling with this or train on it, so to speak?
Yeah, it's one thing when we're trying to help ourselves, which is kind of what I've been referring to this point. I think if you have someone on the team, either you as the leader or one of your other team members, if you have a good peer-to-peer network, really needs to ask them if they're are they aware of this? Like, give them some examples is what I'm trying to say. So give them some examples, ask them if they're aware that this is true. I mean, if they can't even see it, then you probably have a problem on your hands. But if they can, when you show them some examples, if they can see how it would make someone feel a different kind of way than what you would want, and then do they want to improve? And then it's really the same process that once they say, yeah, I see it, and yeah, I want to improve, then just asking the team, and they should do this, ask the team to help them by giving them feedback on when they see it happening. Hey, you're doing that thing again that we talked about, that type of thing.
Yeah, and that's definitely not easy, for sure. I know when I joined the Magic leadership team, I found it really hard to challenge others in a leadership meeting setting. And I really didn't understand that ultimately that was for the betterment of the team. And, obviously seeing that I was struggling with that, another team member said to me, um, you need to be either in or you need to be out. So, that was a direct, comment to me. So I had to decide that, do I want to be in? Do I want to learn these skills? Or, should I just give up this journey and just say, yeah, this isn't for me? Well, eventually, as you know, I decided to stay in, but that type of feedback or that type of comment or challenging me was definitely impactful for me.
Yeah, and I know it was new to you too, because in your
Yeah.
previous career you weren't used to that. But I remember that meeting well, and it was really super rewarding for me to hear that. It was from Pat Hartman, who was one of our DMs, and the fact that one of our DMs felt comfortable calling out one of the owners for a kind of a violation of one of our values, I thought was really impactful, and it showed me that we had gotten to the point where we could really be open and honest with each other in these leadership teams meetings, which is part of making progress on all this. You've got to have trust that everyone has everyone's interest in mind.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely a defining moment, but a really great learning lesson as well. So now we've discussed humble, hungry, and smart as key characteristics of the ideal team player. We want to just take a moment and just like summarize it a little bit and bring it all together for a second, just kind of review what we've talked about so far.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is, again, I mentioned it already, but I'm just going to repeat it. If you really don't believe in getting that you need to get better in this, or that you want to have these as your values, then don't do it, because it can't be lip service. It can't be a tool. But if it's who you want to be, or who you are already, then by all means, I think this is a great process for making sure your teams are better.
Hmm. All right, so let's actually get into the practical stuff. We talked about this in theory a lot. Let's assume that we all want this. What's the first step? How do we go about doing this in a practical setting?
I mean, talk about it, right? Talk about it on every team meeting. If you have group meetings or manager meetings, model it yourself. Make sure you're practicing the things we're talking about. Everyone, make sure it's clear that everyone in the company, or everyone on your team, whatever your team is expected to be working towards this. They're expected to be getting better at humble, hungry, and smart, and to be making progress. It can't just be, again, talking about it. Reminders in every meeting, making sure that you're demonstrating it as the leader day to day. So when I say discussing it, I would build it into our hiring process, our onboarding process, every meeting, every one-on-one meeting, performance reviews. During documentations, we would talk about our values and how this person has violated a value, and that's why they're receiving this write-up, and here's how you can get better. And during terminations, we always couched every termination was because of a violation of a value. And you just can't repeat it more too often, but you have to model it. And also make sure you're admitting your mistakes. Again, that's part of the humility is yeah, I've been trying to be better at this, but I slipped up. So sorry about that, and I'm going to work harder. That type of thing.
Yeah, I know when things show up on performance reviews and write-ups, it sends a pretty clear message that the team or company as a whole is very serious about what you're saying.
Yeah, I think you have to be.
Yeah. So you've talked a lot about Magic's core values in the past. How does humble, hungry, and smart relate to core values? Do you actually use the words humble, hungry, and smart in your core values, or is it something that's kind of just meshed in?
Well, in our case, we had a set of core values that we had worked on about 10 years ago, and we used those kind of in the way I'm talking about humble, hungry, and smart. This is a great process for someone who in your team or in your company, if you don't have real specific, clear core values, these are great ones. And I would just jump all over this. If you have core values, then use your core values in similar ways to this. I know at Magic, our core values were very similar to these in terms of mirroring. So you can use the exact same processes regardless of which way you go on that.
Hmm. So when you are actually training on this, training an individual, for example, do you try to train on humble, hungry, then smart, or do you try to make it like a three-faceted approach where you try to train on all three as far as this is definitely the expectation, the mission, the goal? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, these three are intermingled and all three required. So like we're not looking for some people who are humble and other people who are hungry and other people who are people smart. We're really looking for people who are all three. And if you have someone who's humble and hungry, but they're not people smart and they're not really trying to get better at people smart, in my opinion, they're probably not a fit for the team. And similar, if they're hungry and people smart, but they're not humble, then they're probably definitely not a fit for the team. So, I mean, I would always be talking about these three all at the same time. I wouldn't have separate trainings on each. I think they all work together.
Mhm. So on the daily, when you're incorporating this or creating this mission for yourself, what can you do to build on this in like a
I think
store
that
environment or whatever?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is just day to day catching people doing it, and that should be everyone on the team. When you see someone exhibiting humility, when you see someone super hungry, when you see someone who's really exhibited that people smarts in action, make sure you call it out in the moment. And if you have company meetings, like we do weekly calls, call it out on the call. Hey, I saw these three examples I wanted to point out, because the only way it's going to spread is if people know what it is. And so you're calling out the person who's doing it, and hopefully they feel good about that, but it's almost more important that the other people who are around are seeing it and understanding that's what we're looking for.
Mhm. So what about the power of the leader's words, whether that be the owner of the company, the manager of the store, whatever. What's your thoughts on the power of the leader's words with it coming from the leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super important that we're always aware as managers, as whether it's company owners, whether it's store managers, whatever your specific leadership role, it's important to understand how impactful your words can be to your team. And I'll tell you, it took me many years, and finally, I forget whether it was Mike or Joe, one of them kept saying to me, Dan, when you say something, it means more than what you think it does to the person you're saying, just because you're the owner, or in many cases, just because you're the store manager. So, it's important to understand that an offhand comment that you make as the store manager, good or bad, might be discussed at dinner that night by that employee and her spouse. And then at Thanksgiving, it might be discussed about, wow, can you believe the manager said this? And all I would ask you to do is just always remember, try and make sure that's a good story they're telling, not a bad story they're telling.
Yeah, yeah, that's good advice. I know we're both fans of Jefferson Fisher. For all of you that don't know Jefferson Fisher, he has a podcast and he's a communication expert. And he said something that really impacted me, and it is the words that you say can affect generations of people you don't even know yet. And to me, that was just really, really powerful, and just a kind of like a nod to what you're saying, Dan. Like how your words carry weight, and it doesn't really even like you were saying. You don't have to be the owner of the company. You can be the manager of the store, or just anybody in general. Like what you say does impact other people.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great speaker. He's no relation, even though it's the same last name. But yeah, it's good stuff, and it's exactly what I'm talking about for sure.
Yeah. So, what happens when things go wrong? What happens when you really mess up, handle a situation wrong, say something you shouldn't have said? How do you go about trying to fix that according to humble, hungry, and smart mentality?
Well, I mean, everyone puts their foot in their mouth occasionally. As soon as you realize it, or as soon as someone points it out, just make a point of correcting it. If you said something publicly, correct it publicly. Don't wait and pull the person aside privately, because you need to correct it in front of the crowd that you kind of made the mistake in front of. And again, it's just one more chance to practice that humility. And there's a there's a study that was done years and years ago about customer service, and I believe it's something along these lines, is a customer will be more loyal to a company that made a mistake and fixed it promptly and thoroughly than a company that was perfect all the time. And I think it's true of leadership too. I think employees will be more loyal to leaders who make mistakes but promptly correct them and do the right thing than someone who has the perception of being perfect all the time. So I just think that's important to remember, that no one's expecting you to be perfect, but making sure you're admitting when you make mistakes and doing the best you can is what they're looking for.
So basically, what you're saying is communication is a key element here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
you want to do an
So
advertisement for the women's forum, which is about communication?
Oh, by the way, if you want to talk about communication, we can definitely talk about that at the Women's Forum this year. So the topic is communicating with confidence. Going to have a great panel discussion, great roundtable discussions. And just to mention, the LEAP program came out of the Women's Forum last year. So there's a lot of great discussions and things that happen there. So please feel free to join us. Men and women are both welcome to attend. Thank you for that little
Little plug. So yeah,
advertisement.
and just to build on what you were saying, yeah, I mean, I think we all hear a lot about it, but communication, communication, communication. I've been doing a lot of mentoring here locally with a bunch of local companies and a few companies in rent to own. And the one thing that's clear is just that constant, clear communication with employees is just so important, and it's something that we failed at Majik doing it enough. You can never over communicate, I guess, is the message I would say.
Yep, that is true. So let's wrap it up with a few final words. While Dan is getting his final words ready, please type in the chat um, which of these traits you personally struggle with the most, or which one you feel like your team needs the most work with. If you could just type that in the chat, we'll take a look at those. And in the meantime, Dan's going to wrap up with a few final words.
Yeah, so just a couple of housekeeping things. On the LEAP website, which is in the APRO website, there's a feedback form. We'd love to have your feedback. What do you want to hear about? What do you did you like this format? Did you hate this format? You have any tips for us? Anything you would like to hear more about? And then just final closing about humble, hungry, and smart is I just feel like it's a super important part of a team dynamic, and your team will improve if your folks at least want to be humble, hungry, and smart. So if you have any questions, follow-up questions, anything like that, you can always feel free to email me, and happy to follow up with anyone who would like it.
Hey, Dan, there's a few people on here. Anthony Smith says hungry. He needs his people to be more hungry. I have a few. Everybody, I don't know, at least here in Kansas, it's right around lunchtime. So I don't know if they're saying hungry, hungry or, or what, if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, hunger. I mean, I think hunger is one of the ones that you struggle with, because if you have someone who does not have that motivation, I just think that the key is finding a way to connect with them, finding a way that they can understand not only what your mission is. In other words, you're helping people, they can help you help more people if they can be more hungry. And I mean, from a more selfish standpoint, most of us at least pay some kind of incentive pay, some kind of bonus pay based on store results. So I would always tie that conversation about hunger with hey, we can all make more money too if we can get X, Y, and Z done. And the other thing is, a little bit related to that is just a clear list of expectations, right? So I think I've been in stores where the manager says to me, "Yeah, they all know what to do." Like, well, it helps if you give them specific guidance. I mean, I'm not saying you need to micromanage them, but make sure they know what to do. Make sure it's clear what their kind of goals are for the day. And if you find someone who seems to be meandering around and doesn't seem hungry, it could be that they're just not sure what to do, and they know they have three things you want them to do, so they're just meandering through the day getting those three things done.
We got another one on here. It says hungry again. I guess again everybody is hungry. I think although dedicated and prove that dedication, long-term employees, I feel, can lose that drive. Any tips on that drive with long-term employees? And, I'll take it. I'll take this if you want, Dan. I mean, part of our core values is hunger is the first word. We have an acronym called HOT UP, hungry, take ownership, teachable, be urgent, and stay positive, believe you can do it. And hunger is the first one. And I've always talked about the chip on your shoulder thing. And I think it's easy to lose the chip. And everybody does it for a different reason. And I think those reasons change over time too. There's reasons maybe monetary. Those reasons maybe you like, and I think that the humility part of being a manager in a store happens when, I mean, you've never arrived. We're always growing and we're always trying to get better. But the humility part comes when you start to care more about the people that work for you and their success than you do about your own. And that's a transition, because all the things that you did to get promoted to a manager and get your name on the door, if you will, changes. It's not about you as much as it was when you were striving to get that job. And that hunger inside that made you want to become the manager has to be kind of transformed and moved to somebody else. And I see a lot of my managers that transition that hunger from a personal hunger to a team hunger and other people hunger. And you mentioned it, like, I've had many goals in my organization of trying to hit this number, this number, this number. And but seeing people grow is I think the most exciting part. And as a manager, when you get to a place where you are driven by the growth in somebody that works for you, that's the hunger that can build, empires, if you will.
Yeah.
But I think it changes. I think what you're hungry for today is maybe not what you're going to be hungry for 3 years from now. That's just life. And there's a great writer by the name of Matthew Kelly. Angie and I both love his books, and he wrote a book called The Dream Manager. And in The Dream Manager, his question he asked is, "What do you want?" And I think that's a valid question. Like, as a manager with your regional, it's like, what do I want? Like, do I want to make more money? Do I want to grow? Do I want to have a different job? Do I want to rent more TVs? Do I want to rent more tires? Do I want to have the best collections in the country? Like, it's different for everybody. But I think you always have to have something you're striving for, your PR, if you will. I mean, I think sometimes our hunger has to be about always trying to achieve a new personal record, and we gotta have those.
Yeah, that's fantastic as always, Mike. What about?
Let me share a quick story. I went to my first track meet I've been in a long time. Went to a track meet. Let me tell you, it's kind of cool. Like, there's so much stuff going on. Like, there's the hurdles they bring out, and there's the high jump, the javelins over there, and the girls' hurdles are lower, and the 330, and this one's a mile, and this is the prelim, and it's hard to keep up with, And I remember watching the race of like an 800, which is 2 laps, and there's people that are winning and there's people that are close to winning, but then there's everybody else. And I think one of the most interesting things I saw at the track meet was the coaches that are right along the track coaching those athletes that are in the freaking back. And every one of those coaches say the same thing: get your PR, get your personal record, and it's like, and I think that's a big part of hunger. Like, it is figuring out what you want, what your personal records are, what you want to do, what you want to be in your store, and trying to beat it. Like, you're competing with your damn self, and I think sometimes we get so outwardly focused, we forget we're competing against, ourself from yesterday all the time.
Mm-hmm.
No, I love that. And we've had managers back in the day who would reach like $1 million store, and that was what they thought was the best, and they're like, yeah, I'm there, I made it. And now we know that there's no limit to the upside of that. So if you're at a $2 million store, you can get to 3. If you're at a $3 million store, you can get to 4. And I love that PR thing. And just specifically for Ebony here, who asked that question, I think with a long-term employee, especially one who's kind of, if you're just kind of trying to implement things and you're trying to stir things up, I think what Mike said is exactly right. Like, challenge them to make their PR, whatever their personal record is, whatever their personal best is. And it's going to be a slow burn. Sometimes those old heads, we call them, they're just so set in their ways and so on, but challenge them to overcome their best, whatever it is. I mean, you have something to add to that, Mike? I see you chomping at the bit there. No? Oh, I thought you were, they were ready.
Yeah, Dan, I was gonna say though too, you have to know what they're looking for, what their best is. You know, having those one-on-one conversations, you have to identify what it is they're striving for. Like you have to have a goal. And it's up to the manager to help them and guide them because they can just get lost just doing their daily tasks and their daily job day to day, which becomes incredibly boring after a while.
Yeah. Yeah, consistency is important, especially if this is a new process for you, because everyone thinks it's just a flash in the pan and you'll forget about it a week from now. So you got to be consistent with it. All right, good questions. Any final thoughts, anyone?
No other
All right.
questions in the chat.
No. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
thanks
we're good.
everybody for joining. I know we were competing against the Missouri rental dealers today, so we lost some attendance. But oh, thanks, Anthony. That's very nice. We
Be
appreciate
clear,
that feedback.
nobody from Kansas, like, I mean, this is my moment to be able to say rock chalk when you comment about MRDA.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.